Well, there was one thing that I saw coming up over and over again from different directions, and that's the idea of rightness and what works and what fits, where Dana talked about assessing the choreographic situation and trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, and Chris just mentioned integrating material or changes according to what's valid for the structure. Peter talked about people in the installations finding the right way to act, specifically with regard to City of Abstracts, to provoke certain movements in their on-screen image.
Oh, that's much better.
Hi.
It's much better. It's much better. Yeah. I was like, yeah. My melatonin is being released. Thank you.
And then you yourself talking about composition as a selection of components to occur when the context is right for them.
Yeah, that's nice. Did I say that?
Yeah. You were talking about the diminished seventh and when.
Yeah. Well, I heard something else when actually a subject came up when that's what you heard, and what I heard was finally that people are reading on stage, and the purpose, for example, of synchronous objects or improv technologies, which is this digital tool we made, was to help people read better. Actually, people help audiences become more choreographically literate or dance literate. So I would say that a lot of the works, for example, what is it called? You Made Me a Monster. Those sculptures are actually things that people are reading. The dancers are reading those. They have a really clear method how to transform that into sound. So they're actually scores, three-dimensional scores. And a lot of the stuff functions as scores, you know. Like I would say insofar as that your colleague on stage is also a kind of score-like imperative to you, yeah? And you have tools to read what your colleague is doing, as Andre was talking about, and to go like, oh, in this case, if that person is doing this, then most likely, the most probable, your brain does this very fast. This is not going at that rate, yeah. It's split second, but you train in the ability to go through an array of reactions. And I guess everyone's in a state of reading either their own composition or what is their composition in relationship to the larger composition. And again, what the guys were talking about was saying, you have to read when someone else is going, you're like, oh, I think the composition as a whole needs less, for example. So that is an issue of responsibility for the outcome of the whole work. That's contributing aesthetics, and also the aesthetics of removal, not necessarily of contribution. You're contributing actually a caesura, you know, or a fermata, or something that is equally valuable, but it doesn't necessarily consist of more action. It's subtracting action, for example. Or if you see everything has stopped, you have to make the decision, do I stop with? Yeah, and that means you've had to keep track of the whole thing. So this issue of what is right. And I guess is what we all hang out. I said at one point, I think I've seen you all more than I've seen my own children, which is kind of sad. But we've spent so much time together that it's, and I mentioned this before, it's ontological. It's a way of being, or it's a way of, you know, living your life. If you're going to be an artist, and it's just one model. But there's many examples of people working collectively so that rules choices become self-evident on some level, and then you can start working on what would be a less self-evident choice. Once that you settle into that, okay, do we agree? Good. What don't we agree on? Like that. And that's very interesting when people start, how do you say, figuring out, as we keep mentioning over and over again, what else it could be. There was the question from Peter where he said, have the methodologies evolved? No, I don't think they have. I think the artists, though, themselves have evolved. The people I work with. Yeah, I can only propose, you know, so much. But the people themselves are questioning their own practice, their own futures, what they want to go on to. They're, you know, many, many years younger than me. How do they want to lead their lives? Is this an example that they could use? Maybe not. Maybe they don't. They go like, oh no, I don't want to end up there, you know. But it's still something that they can react to. You know, it's an environment where they can basically pose questions to themselves. You know, what do I want to do with my life as an artist in this situation or out of it? Would that be? Would you think that's accurate?
It sounds kind of like a really radicalized zone of proposition where the if side is very highly subjective and the then side potentially contains the whole universe.
Yeah, I had a hallucination yeah, isn't that weird?
Just now?
Yeah, just 2 seconds ago. I was yeah, and no, it was in 1987, and I was in the bathtub. I was making a piece called "In the Middle, Somewhat Elevated," and I was really tired, and I was in the bathtub, and I was listening to Mozart C minor Mass, and I think it was Quonium, and it's insane. Mozart was crazy. He was crazy. I mean, like good, but crazy. And so I was in the bathtub, not really thinking, but just listening, and I had that day it was a Walkman. Do you remember Sony Walkmans? Anyone old enough to remember that? And I had my earphones in, and I heard a voice in the bathroom. And I ripped my earphones off, yeah. And it was a voice, and it said to me, "It starts from any point." And so it showed me, you know, some of you know the point line thing. It's from the improv technologies. It's a thing where I sort of explain how lines in space exist. Anyway, that whole digital edition is simply what the voice told me. So, and I kept going back in the bathtub hoping I'd get some more information. Years later.
That's why you swim so much.
Come on. So it's not a question. You're never I never feel at a lack. Yeah, I do feel though my responsibility is to the artist. That's the most pressure for me is the artists, because I feel I should be there for them. That's my responsibility. My responsibility is to find a context for their commitment to me too. People I work with I respect very, very much, and so I feel that I need to find an adequate context for them, you know, and I have to figure out, would they want to do this? Maybe they don't want. What do I want to do? But is it more important what they want to do? You know, it's a battle, and so I could, through It Starts at Any Point, I could let go more of what I wanted, and assume that I didn't have to be the origin of everything. You know, I didn't have to be the Ursprung, as they say in German. You know, it can start anywhere. So if it starts in the side of Fabrice's broken glasses, that's where it starts. Cider, Fabrice comes up and says, "Let's do an interview about the piece." And I said, "Great, let's do it," because I have absolutely no idea what we're going to do. And that's how it started out. And so I was so grateful that person, my colleague, took care of the situation. He was taking care of me, being kind to me, and not going, "Well, Mr. Smarty Pants, you know, what are you going to come up with now?" And actually, yeah, and being incredibly considerate and kind, and saying, "Well, let's start here," knowing full well that it could start from any place. Yeah, so that's what I'm so grateful for, is that I have people taking care of the situation and I also happen to be in it. You know, and that's really you do it all the time. You know, for me, you go like, "What do you think of this?" You know, and I go, "Wow."
Usually, I'm saying, "Did you hear the one about?"
Yeah. She's a great joke teller too, which is really important. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like, and one of the other strands that was sort of floating around in the room, I threw it out. The guys threw it out, was the idea of courage. Dana as well. She threw it out. How does courage look on your side in this particular moment of the ensemble's existence?
I think, one of my sons said, Dad, so, how have you made it work? And da-da-da. I said, I'm just more frightened of humiliating myself than other people. That's, you know what I mean? So I don't like the idea of humiliating myself in front of thousands of people and then reading it a million times on the internet and then in a gazillion newspapers. So I got to get my shit together if I don't want to be in that situation, because I've obviously chosen to put myself in the public eye. So I got to get my shit together, and I just don't like the idea of being in that situation. Yeah, and it's like, who does? Would you want to do that? Yeah, millions of people going. So that's part of it. I mean, that you're out there. You have to accept the fact you're out there. You've decided to say something in public, and you have to accept the consequences of that and be real about it. It's scary. It's not. Everyone's going like, oh, he does this and that. I'm like freaking scared out of my fucking pants all the time. It's not like it's easy. It's not like you go like, oh yeah, piece of cake like that. But at one point, you have to trust yourself. You can't walk around going, oh, there's that old expression, he who hesitates is lost. So at one point, like Andra was suggesting, you build a whole body of information. So I've been doing this for 45 years, right? So you build this thing, and at one point, I don't feel that I do it myself, in the sense. It's not. I don't mean that in any weird sense, but I cannot. As Noah Solier was saying, you don't have enough neurons to do it consciously. And I mean, I don't have the computing power to do conscious computing power to do what I do. So at one point, I'm just going to make decisions, right? They might not all be the right decision, right? But I can go back and change it. You know what I mean? It's not stone. It's not a sculpture in that sense. My material is people, and people are going to negotiate and help and suggest, and So just move and see what happens.
I imagine this is sort of anathema for some theater goers to imagine that when they go in and see a performance, they're not seeing the perfect manifestation of the choreographer's intention.
Oh, it is at that point. That's as perfect as it's going to get. You know what I mean?
I mean, if they were able to recognize it as such, but when the curtain goes up, they see a show.
Well, the question is, okay, here we talked about these received notions, is that art is somehow embodying the notion of perfection. Well, perfect what, I want to say. You know what I mean? To them, perfect, please tell me. And if I'd love to know.
The Magnus Opus syndrome.
Right. Oh, Hans van Manen, right? The Dutch choreographer, he said to me at the beginning, never try to make a masterpiece. It was very helpful. Yeah. Yeah. So, don't get some big idea. It's actually just stay connected to the people you're working with. And it's like, I think what you're probably going to take away from this is that the engine is not in one place. It's not one piece. It's not just me. It's everyone in the room. And the tricky thing is just to keep, how do you say, the trajectory of everyone's art interest in the room. You try to sustain it to a certain point. And at one point, you realize that what you're actually working on is the artist's autonomy. So ideally, in a sense, like a parent, your child should be able, these are not children, these are adults, your child should be able to have their own apartment and feed themselves and survive on their own. And ideally, anyone that comes through our working place, you give them tools that might be useful, or at least an experience that might be useful. And like we mentioned before, it's not something that you say, oh, I'm really going to use this. It might be something you go like, okay, I need to avoid that. They might have seen all the mistakes we made. You go like, okay, I won't make that mistake. I did that exactly in Stuttgart Ballet. I only heard no, 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 like that. Like, oof, you know, just, it was a kind of culture of shame and humiliation. It was just really old school, horrible ballet. And I thought, I'm going to try to not do that, you know, because it really didn't make you better. You know, it made you more subject. So, yeah, I'm interested in the performers having the best experience they can have, but ultimately they have got to have the experience. I can't, you know, I just, limits of my language, you know, I can only communicate so much, you know. I have my ideas about it, what it should be, and they have theirs, you know, also. So.
What do the best moments in performance feel like for you? What sort of constellation of events happens?
Like I have nothing to do with it. Like I have nothing to do. I see the performer, and the performer is on their own. That's for me just bliss. That's fantastic. Love that. Do you know what I mean? Nothing I could add. I don't know how they, I was going, how the freaking hell did they do that?
I recall moments like this where there's sort of a precipitous sense of here it comes, and all of a sudden there it is, and we both just sort of rock back on our heels. And like, oh yeah.
I know, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it happens a lot in the regie booth. You know, everyone goes like, whoa. Yeah, it's pretty, yeah. I mean, not that the performance is a sustained chain of whoa, like that, but I do like the opportunity to admire people's growth, change, you know, autonomy, respect for the idea too. Yeah, just how their notions of partnership with their colleagues, especially because that's what gives the company its look, is that the guys keep saying it, their relationship to each other. That's it. You know, and I'm performing also, but on an entirely different level. So I'm trying to also be responsible for their performances and giving them the time, the space, or not. Actually, if I see it's not working, I'll go like, do not prolong the pain. I can see that I know people so well that I know when something is going particularly well or perhaps not, you know. So I want to partner that way also. So someone mentioned before, you have to keep the don't know mind. If you really are expecting to work teleologically towards a goal in performance, I think in these kind of performances that we're addressing, it might not be so discursive for the performer, because they would already seem to have established the subject, which was the goal, you know, and instead of saying what could possibly emerge, as if I said, okay, I'm at the beginning of the process, so you have to see the performance imitates process. The process is saying, okay, we'll start here, any point, yeah, but where we end up is an entirely different place, and you can let yourself be surprised, too. That's fun. That's much more fun, you know, or enjoyable rather. Yeah. If you could develop a community where we trust each other, I trust the dancers, and they also trust my instincts, I trust their instincts. You know, I think that could really be maybe a way in to the whole thing, yeah. You know, and you also have to trust people's goodwill. Everyone is trying to do a great job. You know what I mean? And so you can't go like, oh, bad. Like, what are you talking about? You're going like, oh, okay. What were you intending there? What did you want to do? Like, okay, I think under those circumstances, and I have to then justify my position, how I feel about it, you know? So, but I ask people then to trust that perspective, which is on the exterior. It's not necessarily objective, but it's still exterior to the inner workings of the performance. You don't want to waste time on bullshit. You know what I mean? Seriously. Yeah, I mean that very seriously. there's so much to be done, and I guess art making is highly dependent upon consensus on some level about innumerable details. Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you have the time to discuss things besides, lift your arm more, like that. And often it has to be that too, lift your arm more. But one would hope that even if it didn't happen in my presence, that things that were problematic or questionable would then be discussed among the artists themselves, and that they would find time to discuss, you know what I mean? Or to contemplate what their practice is. Because it would be terrible if it would only happen in my presence and not outside of my presence, because that would imply some sort of magical animation of forces and, voodoo. I don't know. This is not good. Okay, I have a confession. When I was around 13, I wanted to be an architect. And my friend said, "Oh, you can't be an architect, you're bad at math." Yep.
We are very happy you're not.
I'm happy to. I'm fine with that. It's fine. Yeah. So, yeah.
So you're living out your childhood desires in your career. You've
Right,
been an architect.
Fantastic.
You've been a conductor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let me think. Yeah. No, but this is a serious question. I don't know if as an adult, I think it happened by accident. Because I saw drawings of Daniel Libeskind that looked like his Micromegas series. Reminded me of how my brain thought, what Noah Solier was talking about, these localized geometries. Same thing going on there, or localized perspectives, et cetera, et cetera. And so I ended up being really good friends with Daniel Libeskind and having really interesting conversations about drawing and breathing. And actually, 4N, that piece, is a consequence, finally, of that conversation that Daniel and I had. So, we're talking about drawing breath. So drawing itself is a pulmonary event, not necessarily a mechanical or haptic event. Yeah. So the notion of drawing breath and what the dancers beforehand were talking about is this. Yeah. This connection between utterance, or is a line, a drawn line in utterance. So what's the connection between language, and gesture? In that case, the language that is deployed in architecture is through, or it used to be, through gesture. Yeah. I'm not big on intention. Okay? So I'm more like what's being thrown at me, yeah. Let me think. In Frankfurt, I've discovered 6 different ways to bike to work. Okay, that's city planning. It's moving a different step, but it's not so far. I like that. I like that I can have 6 different ways to go that involve, bridges, parks, things, because I get utterly bored year after year driving the same bike path. I was going to go out of my mind. So I found forests I didn't even know existed in Frankfurt. I was like, oh my God, there's a forest here. And I would say that one of the most difficult things about theater is the fact that it takes place on a stage. You have to rethink it every single time. It's not unlike an earlier conception of painting, which was it took place on a surface. Yeah. So that's been a real challenge, is just simply the repetition of having to redefine that space every single time, for 45 years. It's a lot of how do you say, of variations on the theme. So maybe that's why I moved out, started working also in other kinds of spaces. Yeah. But we didn't do dancing in those spaces usually 9 times out of 10.
I work with Bill a lot as production assistant, looking at the script so he doesn't have to, just by way of remembering what's coming next, and also to keep scenes from compressing too much. I also keep an eye on the times, because if it's a good night, then things can start to pack up, or various things can happen with the time.
But I always come in on time.
Yeah, but after a couple of years, I discovered that I started saying, I'm going to test myself, and I'm going to see when I think it's when I think he's going to go, if I don't say anything. And I discovered that I'm about 30 seconds faster than he is. So when I did have to step in and do the few shows that I did, I actually took that into consideration and learned to have a subjective feel of letting that moment go by, actually looking at my watch and then saying, push it back. And I did manage to come in on time, because even though there's this really elastic sense of time in the performances where the actual length of the scene is not robustly defined. It'll go on until the powder is shot, basically, and then he'll cue the next thing. Uncannily, once the scene length, the performance length, the overall performance length has sort of settled in, he tends to come in within 60 seconds of the usual running time, unless something has been changed, and sometimes even then.
Yeah. The sun's shining. I think we should go outside. Okay? Yeah? Look at that. Let's go. Okay?
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you.